Hi, everybody. This is Bob Goodwin, president of Career Club, and welcome to another episode of Career Club Live. Before we get started with today's interview, I wanted to encourage any job seekers who might be listening to go to career.club. We've got some free resources available for you, including a free weekly coaching call that we do every Thursday at 1 o'clock Eastern. No infomercial, no selling. It's just strictly premier coaching at no cost, and it's forever free. So we really encourage you to do that. And if you know somebody who's in job search, encourage them to attend. For our HR and talent acquisition professionals, we'd encourage you to check out something new that we're working on called Journey Forward, which is a way of taking disposition or rejection letters and actually enhancing the candidate experience and building the employer brand at the same time. Again, you can find that on our website, career.club, under for employers, under candidate experience. So with that, I am really excited to introduce today's guest. I'm always excited about our guests. I'm particularly excited today. This is somebody that I follow in the press. I think she does amazing work, and I'm over the moon that she's agreed to spend some time with us today. So our guest today is Aki Ito with Business Insider. Aki is a chief correspondent with Business Insider, writing on workplace issues. I'm going to read just a little bit about her bio. In 2022, Aki's story about recovering overachievers dialing back at work sparked the national firestorm that everybody will remember over quiet quitting. That story, along with her feature about the end of hustle culture, won the National Press Club's Award for Cultural Criticism and was a finalist for the Gerald Loeb Award in commentary. Aki's journalism has also won awards from organizations like SEBEW, the New York Press Club, San Francisco Press Club, the Webbies, and a number of others. Before joining Business Insider, Aki was a reporter and editor at Bloomberg News for 10 years, covering the tech industry, the Federal Reserve, and the Japanese economy. With that, Aki, welcome.
Hey, Bob. How's it going?
I am doing well. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
No, 100%. And I really meant what I said. I follow you quite closely. I think that the kind of investigative and explanatory journalism that you do, is really shedding important light on things. And our topic today is going to be on what turned out to be a 2-article series that you wrote on loyalty. And we're going to unpack that a little bit. But before we do that, as is our want here on the podcast, we'd love just to learn a little bit about you as a human being first. So where were you born and raised?
I was born in Tokyo, and I spent 5 years of my childhood in the States, in suburban New York, and then the rest of the time in Tokyo.
Okay. And then where are you now? Where are you based now?
I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area.
And how long have you been living in the U.S. then?
Oh gosh, the last time I moved here to the States was in the beginning of 2012. So
Oh,
it's been a while now.
it has been a while.
Yeah, I've now spent more of my life in the States than I have in Japan.
There you go. So, and then where did you go to school?
I went to college in Vermont, at Middlebury.
Oh, nice. How in the heck did you pick that?
I don't know. I think because up until high school, I was in Tokyo, and I think I was kind of done with like the big city feel.
Hmm.
I very much romanticized kind of rural New England. And so I took a look at all the small liberal arts colleges in New England, and then Middlebury has its own ski mountain.
Now we're getting closer to the truth.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think it was mostly because of that.
That's cool. That's all good for you. I think college is such a formative time, and
Mhm.
I think it's really important that young people are where they want to be during college, so that they can be as engaged as they want to be. So I mentioned a little bit about Bloomberg, obviously Business Insider. Do you mind just painting a quick picture of your career arc coming out of college?
Sure. So I actually graduated from college in 2009, which was a horrific time to be entering the job market.
Yeah.
And I managed to get an internship with Bloomberg in Tokyo. And I had a 2 or 3 month internship right after college in Tokyo. And then they hired me on full time as a reporter. So I was a correspondent there for 2.5 years. And then I really wanted to come back to the States. And so I begged and begged and begged until my editors got tired of hearing me beg. And they moved me out to San Francisco, and that was back in 2012. I continued to report on the economy. When I first moved to the States, I was a Federal Reserve reporter, so I wrote mostly about monetary policy. And then after that, I joined Bloomberg's tech team.
Mm.
So, as a technology editor there, I oversaw a number of multimedia projects like podcasts and video.
Yep.
And then in 2021, I joined Business Insider.
Great. And what led you to go to Business Insider? What was the lure?
Well, I'd spent 10 years at Bloomberg, and I kind of felt like I was ready for something new, but I wasn't quite sure. So I actually took 2020 off.
That was a good year to take off.
Yeah, yeah. I had this like big plan to travel around the world actually.
Not so much then.
I started in January 2020, and that didn't really quite pan out. But I was very lucky. I was very privileged to be able to, take some time off and re-examine my life. Yeah, and then I kind of felt ready to come back to work with like a clearer vision of what I wanted. And Business Insider just happened to be hiring at the time, so it's worked out really well for
No,
me.
that's awesome. And you're fortunate, right? You could have gotten stranded someplace if you were doing global travel, and all of a sudden March or whatever happened.
Yeah,
It's like, oh my gosh, wasn't planning on being here for 3 years.
right.
So good for you. And then lastly, what do we find you doing when you're not at work?
Right now I'm really into pickleball. I started playing maybe like a year and a half ago, but very casually. And a few months ago, I started getting into it a lot more. So I play a few times a week. It's wonderful. It's such a great community. That's probably the main thing that sustains me outside of work.
That's awesome. Good for you. That's fun. So, all right. So, as mentioned, you the article that really kind of got my attention because it's something I've been thinking a lot about, which is workplace loyalty. And I've sort of had this thing in my head for a little while on you're kind of thinking of almost more like boyfriend girlfriend and like work I'm just not that into you anymore.
Sure.
It's like I'm breaking up with work, or maybe work's breaking up with me, I don't know. But when I saw your article, you know one, I'd like for you to just talk about what caused you to write the article, and then one of the things I really appreciated was sort of the level of research you did to really understand kind of what loyalty means, the notion of contracts and stuff like that. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I guess just start at the start. What led you to write the article to begin with? What was the impetus?
Sure. So I think it's just a theme that's come up in my reporting over and over and over again. Probably the most recent thing was a feature I wrote about this phenomenon called overemployment,
Mm.
where people juggle multiple full time jobs in secret. This is kind of like the ultimate act of disloyalty, right, to your employer. If you have a full time white collar job, you're almost certainly prohibited from having another full time job. It's usually spelled out in the employment contract or at least in the employee handbook.
Yeah.
So these people know that they're breaking the rules, but they do it anyway. Um, and there was a section in the story where I talked about that, where I addressed it head on. A lot of people would think that this is the ultimate act of disloyalty, but these employees say employers aren't loyal to us. They lay us off at the drop of a hat. They don't give us warning. And so why should we be loyal to them? It used to be the case that you could, if you were loyal to to your one employer, then they would take care of you for life. But we just don't live in that world anymore. And that section, I think, resonated with a lot of people who, you know, aren't overemployed, who don't have multiple full time jobs either. And so, I thought because this theme has come up over and over and over again in my reporting of all these people, especially young people saying employers aren't loyal to us anymore, so why should we be loyal to them?
Yeah.
I decided to kind of address it straight on, and like you said, yeah, I dove into the research and tried to figure out, if it was actually even true that it used to pay to be loyal, and kind of how that has changed over time.
Hmm. You know, as you know, at Career Club, we work with typically people in job transition, and often it's through a layoff, or some type of reduction in force that they are kind of involuntarily put into the job market. And, very much what you're saying, which I don't think will come as a giant surprise to anybody listening, but just that I got caught flat footed. I was blindsided, like, didn't see this happening. And what did I do wrong? It's like, you didn't do anything wrong. You just got caught up in what's essentially a financial decision. And, the company took a decision. Um, but it also does tend to serve as a jading kind of a thing of like, well, I guess if they're not loyal to me, like, what am I being loyal to them for? But there's, a lingering sense of even like people when they're interviewing, they've got multiple things that they're interviewing for. They feel this need to tell the company like everything that's going on in their job search, maybe a competing offer. I mean, there's just this really strong sense of like fidelity and loyalty and things like that. You talked about the contract. What is it psychologically? What is going on that causes this feeling that maybe it's more on the employee side, but this notion of loyalty, what's it even grounded in?
Sure. So maybe I'll take a step back and define what a psychological contract even
Please.
is. Um, so you can think of, first of all, a legal contract, an explicit contract that spells out the terms of your employment, how many hours you're supposed to work, what you're going to get paid, if you have any accommodations like working from home, that kind of thing. But so much of, how we work is not dictated by that explicit agreement. It's dictated by these implicit agreements, these implicit expectations that you come into the job for. And so, you have these expectations of, what your employer will do for you and what you will do for your employer. And so both, you as the employee and the employer will have these, expectations of what we owe each other. And that's what, academics call the psychological contract. Sometimes people refer to it as a social contract as well.
As these are concepts of mutuality and reciprocity, so it's going to be mutually, both parties mutually benefit from this and should be in somewhat equal measure.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's tricky because since it's not fully spelled out, right? It's often we don't even talk about it, let alone like actually sign a contract that lists these things. And so it is often the case that the employee will have different expectations than the employer. So that's kind of the mutuality aspect of it. You have to both kind of be in like rough agreement of what even those expectations are. And the reciprocity portion of it is, like you said, they have to be of roughly equal measure. You kind of have to feel like you're giving as much as you're taking in.
Correct. And so, is any notion of this? Because I've been on the phone here recently with companies based in Europe, and labor laws are different in Europe, and whether it's termination notice, termination benefits, even the ability to terminate people, it's very different than in the U.S. Um, is any of the work here, even the psychological contract, kind of uniquely American or not necessarily?
Well, it's certainly culturally situated. So, the kind of expectations that American workers have or that American employers have are very different from, the expectations that employers in Europe would have or workers in Europe would have. I remember, maybe it was like a year ago, I was speaking to some students who had their job offers rescinded
Yeah.
because of the increase in tech layoffs. And one of the students I was speaking to, she was an international student. She was from an East Asian country. And she was just so floored that this even happened. She was like, if this happened in my home country, like the government would be investigating tomorrow. This is like unheard of. I'm so shocked that like companies are allowed to do this in the United States. So that goes to show, how different expectations are. Of course, like plenty of, American students were shocked with the rescinded offers as well, but, they weren't as shocked as this, international student as
And
was.
that's what I'm saying. I mean, the cultural context is even more pronounced here because, you know, generally speaking, the U.S. is an employment at will, kind of legal construct. And so the company like doesn't need to give you a reason. They're that's basically saying there is no contract here. You're employed at our good pleasure until we decide you're not.
Mhm.
And yet again, traditionally it seems like employees have an expectation of themselves to be very loyal, to not do anything that would seem like it's going against their commitment to the company.
Sure.
And so, you know, I know that there's a little bit of historical context that you've got, and we don't need to spend more time, but just to kind of, again, we're still laying the groundwork a little bit. What were some of the major things that basically started to disintegrate the social contract or the psychological contract in the
Mhm.
US?
Yeah. Yeah, I want to address that in a second, but to kind of go back to your previous point, it's not just about the law. It's also about kind of the social norms that companies are expected to operate within.
Hmm.
So there's nothing that says like companies have to like lay people off, right? There's, this whole idea of like maximizing shareholder value. There's no law that actually says that. That's just kind of this like norm that's
That's a fair point.
really solidified itself in American business culture since, let's say like around the 80s. But so it's not just about like the letter of the law. It's also about the norms that end up, governing the behavior of
Yeah.
companies and of workers as well. And that's probably kind of like a good way to talk about how things have changed because, back in like the 50s and the 60s, even though the laws were pretty similar, American companies didn't treat employees this way, especially if you were in the white collar workforce.
Yeah.
If you were a white collar professional, it was kind of unheard of to be laid off. Like you had to do something really, really, really wrong in order for your employer to fire you. That began to change in the late 70s, certainly in the 80s, as companies, started to operate differently. It's really kind of grounded in like the Milton Friedman doctrine of maximizing shareholder value at the expense of pretty much everything else, including a company's responsibility to its employees. Um, and when you start trying to maximize shareholder value at the expense of everything else, right, you don't want to pay out as much in benefits to employees. You want to fire employees as soon as they're no longer useful to you. Instead of training employees in house, you just want to hire somebody out on the market who already has those skills. So companies became a lot more cutthroat, and that ended up resulting in companies being less loyal to their employees. But I think the interesting thing is, like you said, like in our culture, we in society, even though we've been in this like cutthroat economy for several decades now, there's still this like expectation of loyalty, right? Like we're still stuck in like the culture that we had in the 50s and the 60s when it did really pay to be loyal. So we were happy to be loyal. But it doesn't pay to be loyal anymore, but we still feel like we need to be loyal because we were raised that way. We were
That's right.
told by our parents and our grandparents, like, stick to one employer, be loyal to your employer, and your employer will take care of you.
Well, and that's one of the points I think you make really well in your article. The first article is a major benefit that companies were offering people was security,
Mhm.
right? Whether that was employment security, pensions, but just like we're not going anywhere. So if you show up and you do a good job, we will reward you with, this lifetime employment. Even though it wasn't explicit, it was fairly well implied. And like you said, you had to do something pretty egregious,
Right.
to fall out of favor with that understanding.
Right.
And yet, and I think one of the other points that you make is going back to the time period when things started changing was globalization, right? And companies, moving factories from, the US to Asia or Mexico or India, wherever they went to. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. Like you just uprooted this town. You just uprooted everything that we were kind of counting on.
Mhm.
And I think too, and this isn't in your article, I don't think per se, but it also, I think, speaks to the kind of revitalization of labor unions,
Right.
right? Because labor unions kind of fell out of favor for a while.
Mhm.
And now, in the environment that we're in and sort of a new realization of the cultural norms, as you're saying, and kind of business norms, it's like, well, maybe we do need somebody who's kind of fighting for us because individually we're not winning the fight very well. So
Right.
maybe
Right.
we need somebody that's got some clout, and maybe, collectively we've got a chance to protect ourselves a bit more than not having any support. Does that factor into, did that come out in your research at all with labor unions or any kind of collective bargaining?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think it's played a huge role in the States just because, white collar professionals were never unionized, even back in the 50s and the 60s.
Mhm.
But if you look at cases like Europe, where almost everybody is unionized, unions are a huge reason why workers have so much control over, so much power over like the decisions that their companies make. They in countries like Germany, they have these like really powerful workers' councils where companies basically can't do anything without these councils' approval. So that's on top of kind of the standard labor laws, these collective bargaining units are play a huge role in ensuring that kind of job security for workers.
Yeah. So if our understanding then is that, hey, the game has changed, and the reality is, you know, this mutuality is different than it used to be. Um, what are what are some of the implications for companies that, okay, you're having your way with maximizing shareholder value, and you've got the law behind you, so there's sort of those two things. Is this coming at a cost to employers?
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely is. When you look at all kinds of studies that have been done on layoffs, it shows that employee engagement ends up going down and stays down for a really long time even after the layoffs. I think a lot of like bosses kind of think like, oh yeah, they'll be mad for a little bit, but then they'll like get over it. Most of the research suggests that that's actually not true. People hold on to that for a really long time. So it comes at costs like that to employers because of course like engagement plays a huge role in productivity and ultimately in like a company's bottom line, and certainly in turnover as well. When you're less engaged, you're more likely to go work for a competitor. Um, so there are costs like that, but I think like there are costs to society as a whole too, because every time somebody gets laid off, and there's actually research that supports this too, they end up going into the next job with a more of a mercenary mindset, a lower likelihood to, give it your all and to like really focus on just the money and nothing else, to, less of a willingness to go above and beyond. So it kind of creates this like entire culture of, I think this like workplace that none of us actually want in the end.
Right.
Um, I don't want to like go to work with this like mercenary transactional mindset of like I'm only here for the money and nothing else. Like I want to feel like I'm part of like a greater purpose and to feel connected to my coworkers and to view my job in a way that's not just about the paycheck. But when companies are so mercenary to us, so many workers feel like they have no choice but to adopt that mindset in order to survive.
So it's I completely agree, and that's what we see every day. And it's almost with regret and a little bit of disappointment that it's like finding out Santa Claus doesn't exist. It's like, well, this sort of sucks. Like, but
Yeah.
okay, I mean, if that's the reality, I guess I'll deal with it. And I don't mean to diminish it by introducing Santa Claus into the conversation, but what I am saying is that no, we hear this. It's like, well, I guess, you know, and so if that's the way they're going to treat me, I guess I have this new kind of view of what reality is, and I
Mhm.
need to kind of play by the new rules now that I understand them better.
Yeah.
And but again, I think people do that with more than a tinge of regret that they wish
Mhm.
it wasn't like that. And so, your point is well made too about people want to feel like there's purpose, that they can be passionate about what they do because they know they're going to do better work. It's going to be more stimulating to them, right? And that it, as you say, isn't just about the paycheck. So, I still think you know, and I skew highly optimistic, just so you know, that that people hope that they can find that potentially rarer company
Mhm.
that isn't going to be quite so transactional and will value their people and not, lay them off at the drop of a hat. But there's definitely been a sobering of, okay, I think I understand the rules that are in play now and I need to accommodate. One of the things that you said in here, you said, you kind of referenced it sort of a minute ago, is kind of this vicious cycle, right?
Mhm.
Of, well, you kind of screwed me, and then the employers are going, well, yeah, well, you're quiet quitting, and and there was just an article I was reading this morning about kind of how Fridays are shrinking, right?
Right.
It used to be like, well, one, you just got to like wear blue jeans, so that counts for something. And then it's like, well, you can wear blue jeans. In fact, you don't need to come to the office on Fridays. And then it's like, well, we're going to give you Friday afternoon off. And then it's just like, it just Friday's shrinking, right?
Mhm.
Um, but people are just kind of, whether it's shrinking because we've allowed it to shrink, or people are like, hey, I'm shrinking it myself because I'm not in the office, so I'm going to knock off a bit earlier today. That whether you're not giving me your best effort from the employer's point of view, or the employee's like, why should I? Because you're probably going to fire me tomorrow for nothing. How does that vicious cycle get broken?
It, I spoke to a few different organizational psychologists about this, and they say it is possible for employers to break the cycle. It's probably a little harder from like the employee side to break the cycle, right? Because you can't really control like what your employer is going to do to you. But certainly employers have the power to break the cycle, and it really starts with demonstrating that you're not like all the other employers. I think by showing that you see your employees as you see your employees as humans, as people, and not as line items on a budget. One professor I spoke to talked about uh, treating your employees, your ex-employees, kind of like alumni.
Yes.
So this is something that management consultancies have done for a really long time.
Yes.
They have the up or out culture.
Yes.
So like, most of their employees end up not working for them after a few years. They hire like, huge classes of people straight out of college or out of business school, and then they stay there only for like a few years, and then they end up going somewhere else.
Right.
But they, a lot of those people who they end up not promoting and kind of firing as a result, end up becoming their new clients, for example.
Yep.
So they have to treat them well. So the way that they've done that traditionally is by organizing like networking events, for example, or providing like career services even to their ex-employees. So they're part of kind of this network over their entire career. So it's not lifetime employment, but it's a lifetime relationship. And And I feel like that's like a little bit more honest, a more honest way of treating employees, because it's kind of like you're not pretending that there's this like lifetime
Yes.
employment, right? When bosses are mad when their employees leave them, when they're like, "What? But like I thought we had a great thing going," that's ridiculous, because bosses are happy to lay their employees off when times get tough. So it's very one sided in that way. But I feel like these things like alumni groups are more intellectually honest in that way. They're saying like we're not gonna keep you on forever. Like we can't promise you lifetime employment, but we'll do our best to treat you as like decent human beings for your entire career, not just for the time that you work for us.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's probably just like a small step that companies can take to try to restore, I guess, contract with employees.
I think it's really important, though. I mean, I think about two people. I don't know. Steve Cadigan, was LinkedIn's first CHRO, wrote the book Workquake. Very that is a huge theme in Workquake. Is let's have a relationship for their entire career, not just while they work for us. For all the reasons that you said, I mean, it's very likely they're going to be a client, a supplier somewhere in our ecosystem, and we want them to say good things about us. Or if somebody says, "Hey, Aki, I see you used to work at Bloomberg. Is that a good company? Because I'm thinking about applying for a role." And you go, "They're awesome." Yeah. Or, I don't know. Well, that matters to Bloomberg if their
Right.
alumni are saying, "No, that's a crap company." That's the whole purpose of Glassdoor, right? It's like, "Hey, should I actually work here or not?" So, I mean, there's so many reasons that, it's in a company's best interest to do this. Like you said, management consulting firms, I know accounting firms, the big accounting firms are very much into their alumni network. I'm in Cincinnati, as you know. Procter and Gamble has a very huge alumni network, and or Wall Street. I'm ex Goldman, I'm ex wherever, right? They really encourage that because they know they're likely to encounter these people later on, and they want to have built, a good relationship with them, even though they're not going to be married forever. That's
Right.
okay. Like we still want to be able to attract the best talent, nurture them while they're with us, and then if for whatever reason there's a separation, well, but I don't feel terrible about this. I'm not going to be negative on the company forever. And the
Right.
company, like you say, is doing things that are tangible, rather than just sort of, nice words, but actually things that would be helpful to the person. Dory Clark talks about the long game, and that's a really good example. Some companies don't understand this, and it's just all about right now, what's the next thing that I need or want. And I think they do it, kind of at their own peril, that they're not taking this longer view.
Sure. But, when you're a publicly traded company and you're kind of under pressure to squeeze out every penny of profit in that, specific quarter, that really creates like a culture of neglecting long-term value. And it's really sad to see that, because like you say, there's so much value to be had, to be added
Yeah.
in the long term. But, companies have to be patient to see those benefits over time.
But you'd like to think, right? And you're right. I mean, I'm not going to be Pollyannish and like, oh, but I mean, the CEO is in charge of strategy, and strategy by its definition is longer term.
Mhm.
And I think one of the other interesting points that you identified in like, why would I want to do this? I think there was a company that had like a 25% boomerang rate. So people coming back to work for the company after they had left, which is really a testament to, hey, like, I have no hard feelings. That was not a bad company. Like the season changed, but things changed again, and I still have a positive impression of the company. And now there's a reason for me to be there again. I do think it speaks, though, to our whole topic, which is the changing nature of work. And it actually, whether it's a 1099 or a W-2, it's just going to feel more gig oriented. Did
Yeah.
you find that, Aki?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's Reid Hoffman who
Yeah.
once wrote that companies should see their employees as kind of like completing tours of duty.
Yes.
right? It's no longer like you stay at this one company for like, 10 years or 20 years or 30 years.
Hmm.
It's really like, employees will stay only for a few years. They'll, add a particular skill set and they'll go on to something new. And that's just the way that our careers work now.
Yeah.
I think, as our tenures at each company get shorter and shorter, it's almost by definition going to seem more like we're taking on going from like gig to gig, from project to project.
Yes.
And I think the remote work thing adds to that too. I wrote a separate story maybe about a year ago about how the shift to work from home is encouraging companies to kind of like distance themselves from their workers now, hiring more independent contractors, more part timers, compared to before. And I guess, like, as a result, like hiring fewer full time employees, because they're like, if we can hire, being remote does feel like a more transactional relationship at the end from the employer's perspective. So they're like, we might as well, lower our costs by hiring employees in this lower cost way. So I think that adds to kind of like the gigification of white collar work.
New word for me, gigification. I'm going to start using it. I like that. Um, I mentioned at the beginning that you actually wrote two articles on this topic.
Mhm.
You had your original article that I fell in love with, and then a few weeks later, you had a follow-on article. Can you tell folks why that was and what it was about?
Sure, sure. So, I heard from so many people after my first story ran, probably more people than, I've ever heard from in any story I've written in my career. I think it really hit a nerve. Lots of people who are like, you put your finger on exactly what I've been feeling but couldn't articulate. But there was a subsection of those readers who, told me that I got something, wrong in the story. And it was the section I had at the beginning where I was, setting up like the split between the bosses and the workers. The bosses who say, why aren't people loyal to us anymore? And the employees who are saying, well, you aren't loyal to me, so why should I be loyal to you? I put kind of like older workers, so like boomers and Gen X, in like the bosses group. And I put younger workers, so millennials and Gen Z, into the workers group. And I heard from especially a lot of Gen Xers who are like, don't put us in the pro loyalty group. That's totally wrong. Like, we're more disengaged than like anybody else. Like, we've watched this like disintegration of, loyalty over the course of our entire careers. Um, so this is more personal to us than it is to somebody who, just entered the workforce. They don't know any better, but we do. And I thought about it, and as I was, talking to these readers who wrote into me, I came to see that they were actually right, that this isn't necessarily an age thing. And if anything, the older workers, feel this, more poignantly than perhaps us younger workers who have only seen it this way our entire careers. And yeah, so it was a very instructive moment for me, because like you don't really hear like Gen Xers or Boomers like complaining about like the state of the workplace the way that Gen Zers are, on TikTok. Perhaps
Hmm.
these older workers aren't on TikTok at all, but I guess I kind of like assumed from that like they weren't unhappy, and it turns out they are extremely unhappy with the state of things. They're just not as vocal about it.
Well, so again, what I really appreciate about you is sort of the intellectual and journalistic honesty to go, hey, I thought this, I wasn't right about that. And you actually wrote the follow on article. And, just to make sure I'm following them and the listeners follow, for boomers and Gen X, it's like this hurts more because I
Mhm.
really did come into this with the expectation that loyalty mattered,
Right.
and then I got slammed pretty hard that said, oops, sorry, nope, you know, versus a millennial or Gen Z. It's like, I didn't really expect that to begin with. So it hurts a little less. It still sucks, but it hurts a little less.
Mhm.
Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it still hurts for the younger workers too, because they still have this expectation that they're going to be taken care of as well. But for them, it's like a little bit more of like the kind of this like nebulous cultural expectation. Whereas I think for the older workers, they actually saw that play out, saw how like loyalty benefited them at the beginning of their careers
Yeah.
versus now it doesn't anymore. So they have like a little bit more of kind of like a real world, you know, experience, like example of loyalty actually working back from when they were younger.
Yeah. So I just think this topic is fascinating. Like we said, the shelf life on this is a long time because it took a while to get here. It's going to take a while for
Mhm.
things to change. Some of the things that you highlighted as well are things like, well, instead of laying people off, why don't we at least start with a voluntary buyout? So there's
Mhm.
more transparency, there's more communication about what's going on in the business, and to have some alternatives for people. So, you know, in our practice, we talk a lot about agency and having choice,
Right,
right? And when people feel like they don't have choice, that they don't have agency, you get very despondent very quickly.
right, right,
Versus, well, okay, I understand, the business isn't doing as well. And to your earlier point, the stock market must be, addressed, or private equity owners, or whatever it is. But at least you made me have some level, you allowed me to have some level of control in what happens instead of this blindsided, I had no choice kind of a thing. You mentioned that. I think you mentioned learning and development. Could you talk just a little bit more about some things that progressive companies could be doing as we look to change the dynamic? We mentioned alumni earlier.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think like, doing more to prevent layoffs is just so huge. It's just so traumatizing for employees to go through that. And like, I think it means a lot to workers when they see their bosses, when they see their executives like doing every single thing possible to avoid it. So, there's some examples, for example, of companies that like tell employees, we're having a really like we're going through a really difficult quarter right now. We're going to have to cut some costs. Can you help us figure out how to get
Yes.
through this? And as a result, employees end up volunteering to take an across the board, let's say like 5% pay cut, and that ends up being enough so that nobody has to get laid off. That's one way that companies can weather bad times. And I feel like that goes so far in like engender, in encouraging employees to be loyal to them back. So that's one thing. You mentioned the learning and development aspect. Doing more to like promote employees from within
Yeah.
to help them take on, to help them learn more real skills on the job, taking like more chances on them instead of like, going to like the most experienced person on the outside market. I think that goes a long way too for employees to be like, oh, this is a company that really like wants to help me grow, because that professional growth is like such a huge priority for employees. So that's probably a big thing as well. But probably, I think like the biggest thing is like it's not really kind of like one of the professors I spoke to told me that the psychological contract isn't really this like tit for tat thing. It's not like we have this like clean ledger where like on the left it's like everything we get, and on the right it's like everything we give. It's not that clean. It's really about kind of the feelings of trust and loyalty that come out as a result of like expectations being met. And so I think a big part is like employers just being honest about what they're offering to their employees, and coming to the table with employees and being like, okay, so we're like, we can't give you lifetime employment. Like, we'll do everything to avoid layoffs, but there might come a time when we just have to do it. And like, we're really sorry, but that is a possibility. So we have to be honest about that. But here are all the things that we're going to do to try to treat you like a person and to help you grow. So to really like, help maximize your career. what are the things that you can give us in return? And the worker would be like, okay, like, well, if you're going to give me all of that and that kind of transparency, I'm going to promise to like treat my coworkers well, and I'm going to, give it my best, when times get really busy, put in a little bit more, as long as like you let me put in a little bit less when times are a little bit more quiet. So you kind of have this like real negotiation, this like explicit negotiation for the first time where all the cards are on the table. And I think that's like one really important way that you can rebuild trust between employers and employees. Because like right now, the thing we have now are all these like unspoken expectations,
Yeah.
right? And employers, benefited from that because employees acted as though they were going to get lifetime employment. So they put in the kind of effort that you would put in if you had that amount of job security. And now employees are really mad because they're like, well, you didn't give us, this like job security that we thought we were being given. So I think kind of starting from that point of honesty is the most important thing.
The word that's really, really well said. The word that is popping in my head as you're talking is collaboration, and
Mhm.
and more of a we and us kind of a instead of us and them, but it's just us. And how
Mhm.
do we? I love the example you were citing on. We've got to cut expenses. How can we do that instead of us unilaterally going, well, what's our biggest line item? People. Yeah, and let's just start whacking.
Right.
Um, the other thing you said it early in this conversation, and you just came back to it, and it strikes a chord with me because it's so at the ethos of why I started Career Club to begin with, which is these are people. They're not
Mhm.
cells on a spreadsheet. These are people, and when people feel honored, respected, that you took my opinion into account. Even if you didn't do what I wanted, at least you heard me. And I
Mhm.
believe that you heard me, that makes a giant difference because at the end of the day, we're emotional, right?
Right.
And, we want to be rational, but we're really emotional. And I
Mhm.
just want to, not just, but I do want to be heard. I want to
Yeah.
be respected as a person, that I have an opinion, that it's worth hearing. I know you can't do everything for everybody all the time, Mr. and Mrs. Employer, but I at least want to be heard. That goes so far to people feeling like, hey, I'm part of something here that's more than just me, because I genuinely believe that people actually do not want to be independent contractors. They want to be part of something. I think as human beings, we're wired to want to be part of something. And when companies can engender that feeling in people that's authentic, not constructed, but it's authentic,
Mhm.
that I think that they will find that, to your earlier points, engagement, productivity, retention, innovation, all the things that they actually really care about in both the short and long term would be realized.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like, if you asked me even a few years ago, I might have been like, oh, like companies treating their employees like humans instead of numbers. I would have been like, oh, that's so naive. Like, this is capitalism. This is the way
Mhm.
the market works. But I've actually changed my tune quite a bit on this. Just being in this role where I talk to so many people, job seekers, more often than I did before. And I think that's right. I think, we have this like fundamental human need to belong and to, sacrifice, I think, for a greater good. And work is one of the, main structures we have to allow people to do that. And when you do have that, you get these like amazing things as a result. Companies accomplish incredible things. But you just can't have that when you treat your people like garbage. And you can, hide behind like this thing of like, oh, this is capitalism. This is the way the market works. Like we're maximizing shareholder value. But that's not really the world I want to live in, and I suspect that that's not the world that most people want to live in either. Even the bosses, even the executives who are making these decisions.
Yeah. So it's funny, Aki, as you were saying that, I'm like, yep, me too. Like if you talk to a 10-year ago version of Bob,
Mm,
They're pretty capitalistic about everything. And what changes is when you hear people's stories.
yeah.
You've got good people who are trying to do the best they can and are not, they feel like they're being penalized for that. And I think, too, and back on the generational stuff, is that Gen Z is demanding better. They are. They're just straight up demanding better. And
Yeah.
if nothing else, they'll just wait you out. You know, like, so fine, if you still don't get it, I'm going to be here after you're here. So I'll go create the world that I want to be in because it
Mhm.
doesn't look like that. Um, it's interesting. Is there anything else before we put a bow on this, Aki, that you would want to share with respect to the article, your findings, or anything you'd want listeners to take away?
Hmm. No, I think we covered pretty much all of it. This kind of this idea of like a more human workplace, and specifically like this idea of like meaning in work is, one of my like long-term themes. And it's something I'm going to be reporting out a lot more over the next few years, I think. So, yeah, if any of your listeners or viewers have thoughts about that, I would love to hear from them.
Awesome. And speaking of that, what is the best way for people to follow you or be in touch with you?
Probably the best way is to follow me on LinkedIn. That's where I post all of my stories. Or, if they want to kind of make like a personal comment to me, they can email me. I'm at aito at businessinsider.com. I read every single email that comes in, even though sometimes I'm better than other times about responding, but I read every single email that comes in.
And as a random podcast host, I can attest to she does read all of her emails and even responds sometimes. So, Aki, this has been amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob.
You've educated me. I think in some ways, as your other people have told you, you were able to articulate something I think that people feel and that they're not crazy and like this is what's really going on. So I appreciate everything that you're doing. To our listeners and viewers, please follow Aki on LinkedIn. She does post all of her articles. If you just click the little bell next to her, then you'll automatically get a notification on LinkedIn whenever she's published something. I'm a subscriber to Business Insider. No consideration in any of this. I just, really like the work that they do and would encourage you to subscribe as well. But Aki, thank you so much. This has been amazing.
Oh, thank you, Bob. I really appreciate it. This was
No
fun.
worries. Thanks. So thank you again for watching and listening. Of course, as everybody says, ratings and reviews really do help. So whatever podcast platform you're catching this on, if you're watching this on YouTube, subscribing, reviewing, rating all helps. But with that, we just appreciate everyone investing a few minutes of your day with us today. And Aki, thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
I know